All right, good morning, everyone. I am Jessie Whittish with Kentucky Youth Advocates. It's great to see all of you here for our 40-somethingth forum. And just a reminder that we are recording today's forum as both a video and as a podcast. So we ask that you stay muted. But if you have a question for Bruce or Terry, please feel free to drop that in the chat, and we will try to get to those. And if we don't get to those, we will follow up with you or try and send that out in the follow-up email to everyone. So please do drop that in the chat, if you would, please. All right, and with that, I am going to turn it over to Terry Brooks.
Hey, thanks, Jesse. The quick answer, if you look at the chat, Mahek is wrong. Baseball is not a sport. Josh is correct. The only real sport now is spring football. So that's the answer. In case you want to know the answer to the question, that's what it is. So we appreciate, as always, you joining us. I don't think we ever start this without saying whether you have joined us for all 45 of these or whether this is your first time here. We are so glad to have you. As you know, we work really hard on these forums. We have had our guests today before. We have had members of our federal delegation. We've also had state leaders ranging from the governor and lieutenant governor to Senate president and speaker of the House. And we've had local grassroots leaders. So we really try to think about policy through multiple lenses. Recently, however, and you all know this, the role of the federal government around Kentucky kids' issues has perhaps never been more profound. Both the pandemic at large and what we're here to really focus on today around the American Rescue Plan. So it's important to get our heads around the notion that it's so easy sometimes to dismiss what's happening in DC and what's that mean for my community. Right now, that is a paramount focus that we all need to attend to. We could not have a better person to talk to you about that than our guest today, Bruce Lesley, who heads up First Focus for Children. Jesse or someone is going to post in chats and links all the formal stuff about Bruce, so you can be impressed objectively when you read that. What I want to do is just make sure you know my impression of Bruce is the best blend of what a leader and an advocate is. You're going to hear principles, but you're going to hear pragmatism. You're going to have someone who has a deep reality base, but that does not dilute his capacity to imagine the best future for kids. And I hope you know that's what we try to do. We try to balance principles and pragmatism, reality and imagination, and I think that's the art of advocacy. So we've got a person who is an absolute megastar at that art today. And Bruce, I'm so appreciative of you taking time to be with us today.
Oh, thank you so much, Terry. I always appreciate working with you all at Kentucky Youth Advocates. You guys are one of the preeminent kid groups in the country and just do such fantastic work. So it's always a pleasure to be with you.
Well, I'm going to divert for just a second from the topic today around the American Rescue Plan. And we're going to get to that. That's going to be the feature. But off camera, you made just some, what I thought were really profound observations on the state of kids in the pandemic. You were talking about your worries, your concerns. Again, I want the focus to be on that federal plan, but there's no way I don't want you to spend a couple minutes reflecting on our conversation off camera, because my colleagues need to hear that just like I needed to hear it, Bruce.
No, absolutely. I guess, part of our mantra, right, is that kids are always the afterthought. And one of the things during this pandemic and economic recession that that I think has been a misnomer is that there's been this sort of sense that the kids are fine, and you know, as you all know and we know, the kids are not all right, and pretty much every aspect of the lives of kids have been, you know, impacted by both the pandemic and the recession, and kids have actually sacrificed, right? They didn't go to school, they didn't do all kinds of things. And there was a recent study that showed, you know, that tens of thousands of kids' parents have passed away in COVID. And so, you know, what are we doing with them? And then with regard to the vaccinations, I just worry that there's been, you know, we've seen some good and bad, you know, around the vaccine rollout, right? And the question I have is, there was money set aside and for all that for adults, and is there a plan for kids? Because it can't be the same. You know, you can't have the same type of rollout for kids. It's got to involve pediatricians and schools and WIC clinics and, you know, all kinds of things. So where is that plan? And also, I'd worry that as a society, kids have sacrificed. So during the pandemic, and now we're all getting, as adults, we're all getting vaccines. And so what are we going to do to protect kids? Since they'll be the one population that still is not vaccinated. And so I do worry, particularly with the variants and strains that we're seeing, you know, what's going to happen, and are we really thinking through the kid piece? And again, I worry that they're going to be an afterthought, and then the vaccines are going to come out. People are going to be like, oh, you know, what do we do now? You know, and so both the feds and the states and local governments, pediatricians, like everybody needs to be a part of this plan now for what we're going to do for kids.
Okay. Well, thanks. And that's, you know, that's such an important point. It's one that candidly, I think all of us maybe need to spend more time on than we're doing at the moment, is being proactive, helping government leaders, state leaders in our case, think about the best way to do that. So I appreciate that. My colleagues know I love the phrase cerebral itch, and you have made me scratch my brain this morning. So I think we've got a good cerebral itch for our public health folks here today. So the focus today is that 1.9 trillion American Rescue Plan. And we're going to focus on the anti-poverty measures for kids, which I think is a shared perspective. But I also have a hypothesis, because Bruce, the folks on our call, we rely on to give voice in local communities for kids. So I think it's really important that we spend a few moments talking about the broader narrative on this plan. And the easiest thing in the world for KYA to do is to immediately jump into the anti-poverty measures and start dissecting those, and we're going to do that. But I want some conversations from you about the bigger picture. I tried to synthesize, this is going to be the longest question. The rest of these are going to be short, and then you can just extrapolate all you want. But I think it's important for folks to hear a divergence of voices, which is really percolating, I think, you know, on this plan. A Florida representative, Matt Gratz, says, this is nothing but a Trojan horse for socialism. Another person, Eric Levitz from the New York Magazine, talks about that this could be the most profound and far-reaching realignment of American policy that we've ever experienced. So you have that yin and yang. You have one of the more respected economic columnists from the National Review, admittedly a conservative perspective, predicting that so much spending will overheat the economy, create inflation, and ironically bury the economic packages. I think maybe one of the lead columnists in Politico, Ben White, maybe summarizes it best. And he says it's the subject of honest, fervored economic debate. If the bill reduces inequities and inequalities and turbocharges the economy, it will make Biden a true presidential hero along the lines of FDR and Reagan. However, if gas and home prices surge, speculative assets soar, and inflation spirals, it will be a different story. So what I want to make sure that our folks know is as we go out and begin talking about the anti-poverty measures, which Republicans, I think in general, and Democrats support, I think we have to have that broader narrative. So when somebody pushes back or says it's a Trojan horse for socialism, we want a response. So talk about, add to that context, share with our partners what you hear going on, and then give us the truth according to Bruce Lesley, which is what I want to hear.
I would say, one thing I would say on sort of the economic pieces of this is that I think this has been unprecedented, right? I mean, because what we've seen is the marriage of a global pandemic that, most of us, unless you were around for polio, we've seen nothing like this, and then a global recession that accompanied that, right? So it's and the talking about like every aspect of the lives of kids being affected. I mean, it's been, you just think of an issue with whether it's early childhood education, the family economics, obviously, and even things like for example, on the unemployment rate, one of the things we noticed was the numbers for of people who were filing unemployment are actually disproportionately parents of kids. So families have been particularly really hit hard on this, and particularly moms. So with school out, mothers have disproportionately had to leave the workforce to take care of their kids. And so that, there needs to be, a huge economic package to really help families, return to work, businesses to come back. But also it's really important to have schools and childcare available. Otherwise people, parents can't go back. So making sure those are safe and stuff. So a lot of the things in the package, I think, were very, very well targeted toward making sure all that happens. And I think that's in all of our interest. And so while I'm not an expert on the economic pieces, but I will say, I don't even think economists are,
Yeah.
I do really believe that this was necessary to really get us back on the right foot and allow families and kids to be on a better pathway. I mean, I'm originally from Texas, and my family told me, send me pictures of the lines, like in Dallas, for example, the lines to get food were backed up so far off the freeway that they backed up onto the first, the exit ramp of the freeway for like a quarter of a mile. Wow. And so, I think that's what people sometimes miss. If you're not on the ground, you sometimes miss this stuff. And I think the homeless issues for kids have also been really profound and horrifying in a lot of ways. And again, how do you reach those people with aid, if you're homeless? Like, you can't send them a letter, you can't, and those kinds of things. So even their ability to access some of the assistance that the package brings, I think is like, there's a lot of work that's going to have to happen. And I think it's going to take a long time. Like, we're going to get into this, but the child tax credit, even making sure, trying to get that to happen monthly is going to take a while. It's not an easy process.
Yeah. So let's, I think there's a couple of ways we could do this. Maybe, and I would defer to you, but maybe initially talk in a broad narrative about the components, such as the child tax credit. And then after you do that, as a big picture thing, let's go back and lift up each of those elements. So is that good with you to start with a broader scope, and then we'll circle back and really make sure folks understand the power of that child tax credit, for instance.
Yeah,
so
absolutely.
Riff away, my friend.
Sure. So one thing I would start with is that, going back a really long way, is in the 60s, when President Lyndon Johnson declared a war on poverty. One of the, some of the big things they did, right, was expand Social Security and enact Medicare. So senior poverty in this country was actually higher than child poverty. And so those two things and some of the nutrition expansions cut poverty for senior citizens by more than 3/4. So the poverty rate for seniors was higher, and it now is well below that of kids. And in fact, child poverty in this country is now 50% higher than that of adults. And so we did, there's the debate on, did the war of poverty work or not? Well, I would say it did. It really worked for senior citizens, and it was mildly helpful to kids. I mean, the poverty rate did go down for children because of the nutrition programs and actually the creation of Medicaid. But Medicaid really took a long time for it to sort of roll out. But then we did things like we enacted temporary assistance for needy families, and actually I would argue that took a step back. The value of TANF today is 40% less than what it was back in 1996. And so TANF was turned into a block grant, and the same amount of money goes to states today as did way back in 1996. So the value of that benefit has actually declined by 40%. And so consequently, child poverty is still way higher than that of, so, it's taken a lot of work to really raise this issue and be persistent around it. And, all of us who work in policy know that it takes, you've got to work on a policy for a long time because you've got to share the data and develop a common understanding around people that there's a problem. You've got to also show that it's there's got to be a doable solution. And so then people have started crafting the idea of basically expanding the child tax credit over time. And the good thing is there's bipartisan support for it. I mean, Senator Bennett has the key bill in the Senate. He's a Democrat from Colorado, but Senator Romney, who's a Republican from Utah, also has a very significant child tax credit bill. And actually Senator Rubio, Republican from Florida, has a child tax credit bill as well. But the good thing is there was reports and evidence that really showed that it was doable. There was a policy solution available. There were champions for the idea, and then finally, sort of all that aligned when President Biden then decided to put this package together. He did not initially have the child tax credit in it, the expansion, and basically between the groups, so all of us, and the champions on the Hill who said, you know what, I've had this legislation and it's critical and it must be in the package. And so they agreed to put it in. And I would say Vice President Harris was actually helpful on that as well. She was a co-sponsor of that legislation when she was a senator, so knew a lot about it. So anyway, the stars aligned. And so I really would argue that the child tax credit piece in the package is sort of fundamental. It's sort of the key point of the legislation, and it is to us historic.
So what does that do, Bruce? Help our folks who kind of hear that and they're like, okay, that sounds good. What does it mean for an individual family? What does a child tax credit do?
Absolutely. So what they did in the bill was, if you go back just a few years ago, the value of the child tax credit was only $1,000 per kid, and it was not fully refundable. So to explain that is you had to earn at least $8,000 at one point to even start getting the child tax credit. And so low income families were really not benefiting that much from it. It was really mostly a middle class benefit. So about a third of the kids in this country were actually not receiving the full child tax credit. So during the Trump tax cuts, they actually expanded the child tax credit to $2,000 per family. They offset some of that because then you got rid of the dependent exemption. So it wasn't like you were getting a double because you also lost the dependent exemption. So some families did better off, and some families with the older kids particularly actually were worse off. But the child tax credit did expand, and it was doubled. And then the idea behind this legislation is to increase the child tax credit for little kids, so kids up to age of 6, to $3,600 a year. and to kids between the age of 6 and 18 to $3,000 a year. So, and then also the kind of, so one was the expansion, and the other thing was the improvement piece of it was to make it fully refundable. And that allowed basically all the low income kids who were not getting the full credit because their families were too poor. So let me say that again. People were not getting the benefit because their families were too poor. Were not eligible for full credit. And so now that's been changed. So, and then last, the last piece, which I think is going to be a game changer for families too, is the ideas to make those credits monthly. So you don't just get sort of lump sum at the end of the year. Now that's going to be a challenge for the administration. Like IRS is like, the head of the IRS recently, who's a Trump holdover actually, reported that that's going to be, they're not sure they're going to make the deadline in the summer, but we're all fully committed to helping in any way we can to make that a reality. But that will be awesome for families because you think about like a family of 4 with 2 kids, and maybe one little kid and a older kid. That's $6,600 a year. That's and then if you sort of put that into monthly payments, that's
several hundred a month.
Yeah. So it's a big deal. And I think it will be really game changing for families. And we know from the Department of Agriculture, some of these arguments that, oh, it's socialism and stuff, like it is not, any of us who have kids know that is not paying for that is not fully compensating for all the costs of kids. Like I think there was a Department of Agriculture study that estimates that the average cost of raising a kid is $223,000 a year now. I mean, not a year, I'm sorry, $223,000 over their course of their childhood. So, but the credit will really help families with some of those, with some of those expenses and really help.
What does the Bruce Lesley crystal ball, knowing goals versus reality of I'm a family, when do you think they're going to get that first check? We're not going to hold you to it, but just help folks frame the timing on that.
Yeah, I think it will take several months for the IRS to sort of figure it out. And as we know, it's complicated. It's all the more complicated because families are more complicated these days. And so, how does the credit follow the child, right? So in divorced families who have joint custody, who gets the check? And we know that about 7 to 8% of kids in this country are in the homes of their grandparents. Grandparents are raising their kids or other family kinship care. So how does that work? Where do those checks go, and how do we make sure that the money falls to the kid? And so the IRS is going to have to develop systems for where the check goes for the 74 million kids in this country, and who's the right people to get them on a monthly basis. And those relationships change, so how's IRS going to know that? And so there's a lot of things for them to work out, but I do hope that, I would say, to answer your question, I would hope by August or September that families start getting those checks. And
I want to take just a quick sidebar, Bruce, and invite other folks on the call here. Help us think through those kind of questions that Bruce just raised. And I'll give you a great Kentucky context. Bruce alluded to kinship care. We know that Kentucky has more kids in kinship care than any state in the country, well over 100,000. But we know the majority of those kids are in informal kinship care. So the issue that Bruce just raised for tens of thousands of kids in Kentucky, it sounds like a really important question is that if I'm living with grandma and grandpa informally, do I still get that money, or does that money go magically somewhere else and I may never see it? So that's the kind of texture that we've got to depend on you to give us. So I just want to encourage you to let us know that. Same thing I would assume about kids whose parents are incarcerated.
Yes.
again, Kentucky is really high on that. So that's a really, really important point, Bruce. So talk about other measures that you find hopeful, because while the child tax credit is kind of the headline, there are other measures that really are about reducing child poverty in this legislation.
Yes, absolutely. So Columbia University did an analysis of the legislation, and they estimated that the entire bill cuts child poverty by 56%. So again, to us, that's historic. The child tax credit was estimated to be about 45% of that. So there were other provisions that actually put it over the tipping point, right, of it, beyond cutting child poverty in half. So a couple of things to sort of highlight is the child and dependent care tax credit is a credit that families get for their child care expenses. That was also included, and it made that credit fully refundable as well. So that's really important piece to add to this. There's also funding for childcare and education in the bill, and I think another important piece for cutting child poverty in half by more than half was that it expanded the child SNAP or food stamp benefits by 15%. And so that increased the benefit that goes to families. And that's a very important thing, because we all know that that really hasn't been updated in a long time, and families run out of funding in the middle of the month often. And so that allows food assistance to stretch further. So that was a big piece in it. And also the checks. So everybody should be getting $1,400 checks. And that also was a significant improvement over past legislation. So if you go back to the original economic stimulus package last year, the CARES Act, it provided $1,200 for adults and $500 for kids. So kids were treated as if they were 41% of the value of adults. So needless to say, we went crazy. Other people went crazy. And what's great is the $1,400 checks actually go equally to adults and kids. And they also fix other problems with the previous bill, like college students were not eligible if they were dependents in the previous bill, and now they'll be eligible. And so so that will help college students and sort of young adults as well. So there was definitely significant improvements from past legislation, and the combination of those things, exactly what you're saying, gets you to the estimate that child poverty will be cut by more than 56%. The other thing was the expansion of the unemployment insurance.
Great. So I want to ask you 3 action-oriented questions. And the first is, are there elements when you think about state policy mirroring federal policy, state opportunities reflecting national trends? As Kentuckians, among those pieces that you want to highlight, talk a little bit to us about what we should be working on to say to our leaders in Frankfurt, hey, did you just see what they did in Washington? Why aren't you doing that in Frankfurt? Talk about how that might play out in a state like Kentucky.
Yeah, absolutely. I would say, like, there was actually money, particularly in the bill, for childcare and education. And one of the things that we really hope to see, and I would hope state governments do, is they're going to get that money, and they need to pass it on. I mean, there's a huge debate going on in Texas, where the Texas Department of Texas Education Association, so their Department of Ed in Texas, is actually holding the money. So they're saying, well, we're not sure how that money will be spent at the local level, and so we're going to hold it. And that's a disaster, right? Because that gets back to our point that we talked about earlier, which is, we need schools and childcare centers to get that money to make sure that kids can go back safely, and that money's really helps them survive. I mean, childcare centers were on the path to closing all across this country. So that money needs to flow through, and state governments need to have a really good plan about how they're going to share those dollars, et cetera. And it's a matter of being ahead. And I know, for example, like one thing that you guys are doing really well in Kentucky is there, on a related parallel issue is the opioid crisis, and you guys are really working on a plan to, if there's a settlement, how that money would be spent. I think a lot of states are it's not even on their radar screen. And so I think that's one key thing is states need to have the plan and put forth, move this money out and make sure it gets to the local communities and the schools and childcare centers. Kind of like the one silver lining too, I think in this pandemic has been, for a long time, we've all been worried as child advocates about what happens to kids in summer school. During the summer months.
Mhm.
So they'll get school lunch, and many kids get also breakfast at schools. But then they leave school, right? And so one of the things we've been pushing for a long time is this idea of having an EBT card so that kids can have access to food in the summer. And we were all told, oh, it's impossible, we can't figure it out, blah, blah, blah. One of the things that's happened is in this recession is that we created a pandemic EBT card. So now we know it can happen, and lots of states did a really good job of rolling out. So that would be another piece, I think, is
trying to make that sustainable support.
Yeah, absolutely. So that kids don't go hungry in the summers.
Yeah.
And we're fast approaching summer months. So those would be at least some things I would say that would be really important for states.
Okay. So we've got this done. You clearly are optimistic about the impact. And I know you well enough that you're already writing the next package for Congress right now. What do you hope we see? And my sense is that this might be an ongoing cycle for a while. So we may have, I don't know if they're different chapters or different omnibus pieces, but I don't think it's a one-off, and I don't think it's a two-off, and I don't think it's a three-off. So either maybe think about the next step, what you hope to see, and then really take a longer look at your vision as this rolls out. What are some other things that we could be thinking about, learning about, advocating for now, so that it influences the future? I don't want to bury the lead, but you make such an important point that we all have to remember that these kind of policy decisions don't happen overnight. And so if our eyes on a certain goal, we got to start working now to get that done next October or next January. So talk a little bit about that framework, how you're thinking about potential opportunities coming up.
Yeah, absolutely. One thing about the American Recovery or Relief Plan, right? So the ARP package that included all these things was that it was temporary, right? So so one of the things that happens is this expansion, for example, the child tax credit and the CDCTC, the child dependent care credit for child care, is they expire in a year. So one of the first key things we want to do is really start working to make them permanent. So a couple of things that are important there is, one is it's got to be implemented well, because if the implementation of it, the rollout of it is poor, then people are not going to, that will be another attack on the idea and the concept. So making sure implementation really works well, and we correct problems that are arising. So if we hear things that are happening around kind of these complex family situations that we were talking about, finding ways to address them, and then and then what we want to do is really make these credits permanent. So there's pieces of legislation that we hope that will be adopted with respect to things like the summer EBT idea. Like the Child Nutrition Act is up for reauthorization this year. So that will be a priority. And so we'll say, hey, we just learned lessons from the pandemic EBT, we can do this. And we should really enact assistance for kids in the summer months. And then there's issues around, how are we going to catch up for kids and deal with some of their issues in learning loss, but also mental health is a huge issue that I really don't think's gotten a lot of attention at the federal level. And so that needs to be a priority. And then last is like kind of going full circle to where we started, what's the plan for kids to get them vaccinated and that rollout to be done well? And there's also other provisions in the package that we really want to follow through with too, is related to foster care and homelessness and things like that. And those have been also huge issues for kids in this pandemic. And so, as kids go back to school, I think we're going to see a huge increase in the number of reported incidents of child abuse. I mean, kids have been invisible in some ways. And so that's going to rise. And then this homeless crisis, like at some point, the rules right now actually disfavor kids. And so at some point that's got to be dealt with. And we're really dumping that problem on schools. And there needs to be a national solution around housing. So, it's kind of this thing, like I was talking to, as you know, Debbie Stein, who's a partner of ours at the federal level. She was like, oh my God, there's all these sign-on letters and there's all these things. It's too much. And I said, well, it's not, because it's sort of it's the reality where here's the window of opportunity is open to address these problems. And as child advocates, we believe that kids, every aspect of their lives have been negatively impacted. And so now's the time to really improve public policy for kids on all these fronts.
Yeah. I'm going to get back to one more action oriented thing about the federal piece, but you mentioned something that I have a growing concern about, and I'm just curious your perspective. I think that everybody really bought the mantra about the importance of mental health supports for kids when they go back to school. So conceptually, that is bought. Increasingly, what I hear is that folks continue to acknowledge it, and when you say, "Well, what are you doing about it?" they're saying, "Well, we're paying attention to that." Yeah, but what are you doing? Well, we're paying attention to that. We're really paying attention to that. Talk about, do you see anything, things that we should be thinking about statewide, but nationally, actual reality in terms of how kids are being supported with behavioral and mental health? Because I worry that the commitment is there, but executing anything of impact may not be.
Yeah, I totally 100% agree with your assessment. I think people do have, I think on a bipartisan basis, everyone's there. Like, oh my gosh, we got to do something. But I don't think there's the policy that everyone's like sort of adopting or what to do about it. And I think I think part of it is it's complicated, right? Like one of the things that we really got to do is we've got to increase the number of counselors in schools and those kind of supports. We've got to make sure that programs like Medicaid and CHIP, but also private insurance does a better job of. There's often in health insurance limits and things like that on kids and children's mental health, and also often an unfortunate sort of first route is to give people, kids prescription drug, to deal with that stuff, and that's not necessarily the right solution. Sometimes it is, sometimes it is not. So we've got to really develop a better system in this country where we're really having better mental health supports in schools and places where kids are, and then also really make sure that we're doing the right thing from a health standpoint for kids.
Yeah, I just think I don't want to belabor it, but I think the sincerity is there, but I think we've got to replace rhetoric with reality, and I worry a lot, and that's a tough proposition. So when I look at the screen here, Bruce, we've got some absolute all-star advocates on this call, which we really are glad of, but I'm also really encouraged that we've got some folks who are have always been great on the ground kid people, but probably are like, I'm not sure about this policy stuff, but we know it's important. So talk a little bit of where we sit today. The package has been passed. You've laid out some important potential next steps at the federal level. I appreciate that you also have talked about state opportunities and challenges. So coach us up. If somebody felt the spirit today, and they're like, man, that Bruce Lesley guy had some good ideas. I want to do something with it. What do I do? How do I activate what I have learned today?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think a couple of things. I think it's really important to note that 2/3 of all funding for kids in this country actually come at the state and local level. And so I would say, if you're really interested in trying to make the lives of kids better, it is sort of a both and, like, and connecting with groups like Kentucky Youth Advocates, and connecting with groups like ours and other people. Moms Rising is really an amazing group at the federal level as well. Or if you're interested in a specific issue area, like, there's definitely groups that are also involved in those kinds of things. And I think partnering with us on, trying to really move the policy agenda for kids. Like, kids don't have voice, right? So kids don't vote, they don't have PACs, they can't make phone calls, they can't, and so they rely on all of us. They rely on all of us as to help be their voice and to raise their voice, and their interests in policy. And so I think, I've seen your action alerts on things. I think, connecting with people, and the action alerts to contact the people in Frankfurt about issues that are important to them, and then also contacting, on the federal level, members of the Kentucky delegation, congressional delegation, and senators about the issues that are important for kids.
So I want to take it one more level closer to the ground. Okay.
Yeah.
So I've heard, and I buy the fact, and I'm actually going to reach out to either Senator McConnell or Senator Paul or my own congressman. A lot of folks on this call are in the 3rd district. So we know that John Yarmouth, while unique in Kentucky because he's a Democrat, has an expanded role in Washington that's pretty pivotal.
Yeah.
Again, I'm looking for some coaching here. How would I go about doing that? I mean, you already referenced, I tend to minimize what sign-ons do versus personal communication. But if somebody really felt the need, what do you tell them to do? How do they reach out to that congressman or senator who feels so far away from us?
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think it's really important to, when they're having town hall meetings, to go and attend and raise the issue. And I think one of the key problems that kids face is that their issues are not top of mind for legislators. And so I think when they're in the district and they're at a town hall meeting or whatever, to raise issues with them, because it makes them think about the issue. You can contact their offices and have a conversation with either them or members of their staff. Staff are critically important in this, and develop a relationship, and so that they also then feel comfortable reaching out to you when there's issues that come up before them, and they're like, there's this kid thing, I need to call someone and see what people in Kentucky think about this. And so you can be that resource to your legislator or policymaker. And then if you're needing resources, I think Kentucky Youth Advocates, people like First Focus on children at the federal level, would have materials. You can reach out to any of us, and we're happy to help with sort of the details around a policy concern, and that's of your interest. And I think one of the things that you guys do that's really awesome is you have the sort of Children's Week in Kentucky, and we have one at the national level too. And that's actually a really good time, because it's a moment in time where the legislature is hearing a lot about these issues, and so it is top of mind. And so when you call and you're weighing in, they're already sort of thinking about it, and then you can sort of dive into sort of the issue that you're most concerned about, whatever it may be. Great.
Well, there is no way I'm going to have Bruce Lesley on without letting you have the sort of final benediction. So give us some challenge and give us some hope as we move out of this.
Yeah, absolutely. No, I just think, some days, and I think many of us probably experience this, you sort of wonder, like, what what impact am I having? And sort of the stuff going on in DC and Frankfurt sometimes probably feels really removed. You don't think people are necessarily listening to the voices of people. And I just have to say, it's not true. Like, I think when they do, sometimes that is the case, but I think that what we're seeing is that sometimes when the stars align and there's an opportunity, that if you've got the right stuff, if you've got sort of the data and the information that of why a policy is important, why there's a problem and a need, and you have a solution, like this is part of the problem on mental health, right? There's not a sort of agreed upon solution. But if you have a solution like the child tax credit expansion, and there's interest, there's a belief, and you can demonstrate that it's actually a doable thing, that you can have a major effect on policy change. And we're seeing it that this is a huge moment in time for kids in this country. And I just like this legislation to cut child poverty in half, by more than half. I to be honest, we've always had that as our goal. We had a piece of legislation that to establish a child poverty target. Even
long ago, you compared it to like the effort in the United Kingdom, right? Don't I remember that?
Yeah, the UK did it, Canada did it. We can do it, right?
Yeah.
And it just takes a while sometimes, and sometimes it's just you got to have the stars align, and that moment has happened, and we've now passed legislation that cuts child poverty by more than half. It's significant, and I think the key thing is now we've got to make it permanent because it expires, and really convince both sides of the aisle to its importance. And Terry, you said this earlier, but like that, making it permanent is going to be later in the year. And so what we can't let happen is this moment in time where there's some focus on kids go off the radar screen. So as the infrastructure bill comes up, there's this next moment to like move on infrastructure. We've got to make the case that kids are a part of infrastructure. That it's about investing in your future. Well, what is a better investment in your future than children? So we've got to keep kids on people's attention, and on the kind of agenda for Congress. So that must continue. And then as we move toward trying a package to try to make it permanent and getting it across the finish line. And so anyway, there's a lot of work to be done, but it's exciting. Instead of playing defense, which we so often do as child advocates, we're actually have a moment in time where we can make significant policy improvements across the full array of issues that are important to kids. It's really an exciting time actually to be a child advocate.
Right. Thanks so much, Bruce. I know the kind of schedule you have, so it's pretty humbling to me that you're a return guest, and B, that you've given Kentucky your time this morning. We really appreciate it. My takeaway is pretty simple. If we want child poverty to expire, we can't let the provisions of the American Rescue Plan expire. So the only way to expire poverty is don't let the legislation expire. So Patricia, I think I am supposed to kick it to you for sort of the closing info and send you out. Bruce, thanks again, my friend. I really appreciate you being here this morning.
Oh, thank you. Anytime. I love talking to you guys and really appreciate all the amazing work you all do. And we learn a lot from you and all the fantastic, advocacy you do on so many different levels. So thank you.
Okay. Patricia?
Yeah. So I just want to echo Terry's gratitude, Bruce, for joining us today. I really took away that advocacy isn't a sprint, it's a marathon. And thank you for keeping up that drumbeat for so long, and making sure, when the time was right, you had the solution. And the child tax credit it's really going to help kids in Kentucky. Pre-pandemic, kids count shows that 22% of kids in Kentucky live in poverty. 11%, that's 1 in 10, were in deep poverty. And we, estimates are saying that over 100,000, close to 150,000 kids are going to be raised out of poverty or closer to the poverty line in Kentucky, which is amazing. It's really exciting.
Awesome.
And we know as well that, it's going to help all kids in Kentucky, but it's also going to have particular impacts for our kids of color. and to help us close the gaps in equity. So we're really excited about that. And we heard your call too, that while it's time to celebrate, there's still much to do. And the window of opportunity is open now, I heard you say, and we're gonna work alongside you hand in hand to make sure that we can capitalize on all those opportunities. So thanks so much. Thank you to everyone who joined us today. Thank you for being that voice for kids and partnering with us. We also want to thank Aetna Better Health of Kentucky for their support of today's virtual forum. And looking ahead to next week, we are going to be discussing challenges facing kids and families experiencing homelessness, and along with how we can prevent homelessness. We're going to hear from folks from the Homeless and Housing Coalition of Kentucky, the Coalition for the Homeless, and the Coalition Supporting Young Adults. And then looking ahead 2 weeks from now, we're going to be discussing the behavioral health landscape in Kentucky. So all very relevant to the issues that Bruce raised. We are going to be tackling them together. So as always, we're going to follow up with an email with a recording of today's forum and the resources we discussed and a link to sign up for next week's forum. So thanks again, everyone, for joining us, and have a great rest of your day. Bye-bye.
Thanks, everyone. See you later.
Bye.